all of those cards on my first turn. Let me show you what a typical turn 1 game of Hearthstone looks like.
Yep, that's it.
And in case you're curious, this is what Runeterra looks like.
To be fair.
Well, that's because these games are actual proper card games. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is like a crazy chimera of different ideas and different writers and different people. And it kind of created like this beast that isn't really manageable. It's why Rush Duels was made. They made Rush Duels as to replace the main game, because the main game is essentially unplayable for anyone outside of the small niche pool of people who like it. The purpose of a turn-based card game is that there is a back and forth between X player and Y player. So you have your turn, you do a couple plays, and I have my turn, and then, you have your turn, he has his turn, vice versa, right? Pokemon works like this too. Literally every card game works like this. Yu-Gi-Oh! Originally worked like this as well back in like DM to the Classic era. You would, summon one monster, and the method to control, summons and the limit of how many cards you could use per turn was often just limited by, tributes. So most cards couldn't be special summoned, because special summoning, by its name, was intended to be special. And so, I know this is like kind of turning into a classic Yu-Gi-Oh! Praise, but hear me out. Normally, cards would be limited by their ability to summon themselves via how many stars they had. So if you had a 4-star level monster, you could summon it first turn. And special summons were more exceedingly rare. Even in the GX era, the era after DM, it wasn't that common to get that many special summons out. Most decks couldn't do it. Heroes can't get that many special summons out per turn, especially in the GX era. Same as goes with Dark Magicians, Spellcasters back in the DM era. Cyber Dragons, they didn't special summon that much in one turn back, like I said, in the GX era. A lot of these decks have had to get fundamentally changed as to kind of keep up with the rampant speed of the card game post-GX era. Because the Synchro era kind of started what's really modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Because the 5Ds anime wanted to create a speed theme, and they wanted to have all the cards go super fast as to have this like turbo theme. They're really fast, they're really different compared to what came before. Part of this was just to sell cards. People won't talk about this because it kind of denigrates Yu-Gi-Oh's gameplay from being purposeful fun, something they designed with the intent to be played, rather than, just something they did for marketing. The reason why the cards go super, super fast, and they do 100 different things, and they are so fast that, you get 60 summons per turn, and you can cycle your entire extra deck, you can cycle your entire deck if you want. The reason why it works like this is because in the 5Ds era, in the Synchro era of the card game, they introduced speed mechanics of having cards go faster, having more summons per turn, and having cards that lean into other cards, cards that are purposely meant to float into other things. Most cards in the DM era did not float, they didn't have an intrinsic mechanic around summoning more. The mechanics were largely based around elements of the gameplay itself, like the combat, for example. Crystal Beast, for example, another example of an example, I suppose, but Crystal Beast literally worked like that. So what would happen is when your monster was destroyed, it would become a spell. Volcanics, the monsters would be used as ammo shells to inflict burn damage on the opponent. So a lot of these were types of decks that were focused around a specific gimmick. There isn't really gimmicks these days anymore. It's kind of just a variation of Yusei's rather, turbo deck, and just it's faster or it's slower or it has more negates. It's generally just the difference between like the modern decks and Yusei's deck, because the kind of, like I said, the kind of 5Ds era is what started this modern Yu-Gi-Oh, where cards lean into other cards as to summon more of themselves. And card games, by their nature, and originally Yu-Gi-Oh by its nature, was meant to have very slow turns that would go back and forth. So you'd have a 20-turn game, and the kind of stars on monsters were meant to facilitate that. Because they didn't really have a mana system, so instead they used a tribute star system, and the later synchro era of the game kind of ignored that. They kind of ignored that mechanic, and they just said, we didn't explicitly have special summoning rules as to limit it. Like, there wasn't a specific rule in place, right? So they said, why not just make the sky the limit? Why not let people summon 12 cards per turn? And, it kind of just escalated from there. I mean, if you've ever played character deck duels, for example, which is like where you get like an accurate copy of a character's deck from the anime or whatever, and you play it against other people who are using other decks from the anime, say Yuma or Yugioh or etc. You'll notice this trend, even Yusaku, for example. You'll notice this trend that even in the anime, where the cards are often more gimmicky, or they're more janky, more overpowered, in terms of, Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! Overpowered in that, the modern card game, the TCG kind of creations, the OC creations by Konami, unrelated to what Studio Gallop did. These sort of TCG decks, for example, they're not janky in the same way that anime cards are, for example. They're very structured and formulated, where each card is meant to specifically flow into another card of its same archetype, which is meant to flow into another card, and etc., until you get to your boss monsters. These cards that flow into other cards are called extenders in the kind of TCG discourse. There's a whole name of cards that are for that purpose, because the gameplay is so centralized around massive amounts of summons per turn. And again, people who are very fond of that will like it, but it is very beginner and friendly. You hop into a Master Duel match. I'm just going to name an example here. You hop into a Master Duel match, and you see someone playing Snake Eyes. You see someone playing Adamantiators, or you see someone playing Castira, or some other meta-ish deck, and they combo off for 5 minutes. You're like, okay, that's a thing, right? You can say you can have your opinions on that. That's how that works, right? And then, you go to Pokemon, you go to Magic, you go to Runeterra, like this guy said before. You go to, if you wanted to play Duel Masters, that's a thing. That's an older card game. Chaotic, for example. You go to these games, all of them that I mentioned, and you'll see what someone does on their first turn. It's very welcoming. It's not that overwhelming. It's not that annoying. You don't have to sit there for 5 minutes. It's a very easy to welcome first turn. And then you, as the player, can respond in turn. You're not overwhelmed by this massive field of Omni Negates. It's much more beginner friendly in that. If you showed somebody, non-biasedly, a long special summoning loop and said, that's the guy's first turn you have to play against. And then you showed someone Magic, or you showed someone Pokemon, and they'd much rather play those things. They're just much more beginner friendly. They're much more people friendly in general, because having to deal with just a massive. It's not even the fact that it's a massive board. It's the fact that you have to wait for it. You have to watch someone combo off for 5 minutes, and people will say, "Why don't you just draw the hand trap?" As if Dark Magician decks aren't hated on because they can't play through a couple negates. Most meta decks can just trudge through it all to the point where casual decks not doing that is seen as a negative. The hand traps are useless because the meta decks can effectively put out more summons than your hand traps can negate, which presumes, again, you draw it into the out anyway. And I hate how people sell this game. They sell Yu-Gi-Oh, which, if they sold it like this and it was this, it'd be a lot more, at least entertaining. They sell it as this game which has so much card pool, so much history, so much war, and how much variety of cards there are. And then you actually like get into the game, you know knowledge of it, you start playing it, you get into the community a bit, and you tend to figure out very quickly that while yes, a lot of cards are legal, about 99.9% of them are completely competitively non-viable. And you could say just play casually, but there isn't really a casual Yu-Gi-Oh community. If you go on Master Duel and you try doing a match, you try doing a matchup, you try doing a duel, you're never going to get a casual match. It's going to be somebody who summons like 1,000 times in a turn. So most of the, benefits Yu-Gi-Oh gets via having a huge card pool, which is like variety of play, doesn't really exist. And since all the cards are essentially variations on the same format, the same original, card style, which is, UC's Turbo deck, it's essentially kind of like, even if there is variety, it's not really variety since they're all combo decks which essentially function the same way. It's not like, there's like burn decks and mill decks. Like, those died out in the DM to 5Ds era. I mean, no, DM to GX era. There was, like, burn decks introduced in the 5Ds era. They were just completely non-viable, like, Iron Chain. Essentially, it's just combo decks, like, massive spam decks from the 5Ds era to current. There isn't really mill decks or burn decks. Any amount of variety to the gameplay has been kind of snuffed out. And even if you like that sort of gameplay, it is a very repetitive loop because it's the same sort of gameplay endlessly. So you really, really have to like that gameplay to even like commit to the game because there isn't variety to the game. And if you like that sort of like extremist kind of gameplay style, which is like balls to the wall, it's not really that fun because it's so repetitive, even if you like it. And that's the only way to play it on multiplayer. The best bet to actually play the game is if you have a friend group or like a Discord group where you can effectively select whatever you want because you're playing with people who are more palpable to what you want. So you can effectively switch whatever like decks you're playing with your friend or whatever, but you can't really do that when you're just in a random queue. And people will defend like the massive special summoning loops where, it's like zero interaction from the opposing side.